Welcome to the Bogosity podcast for the 12th of November 2012, the podcast that's had a near-life experience. This is your host, Shane Killian. Let's bankrupt the news of the bogus. In June of 2011, this podcast covered the story of Italian seismologists who were blamed for not foreseeing a major earthquake, even though science has precisely zero reliable means of predicting earthquakes. Now, in a staggering feat of bogosity, these scientists and experts, all 7 of them, were found guilty and sentenced to 6 years in prison. They also awarded the earthquake victims the equivalent of hundreds of thousands of dollars in damages. A bogometer the size of Mars would not be big enough to register all the bogons emanating from the Italian court. At the core of the case was whether or not the scientists could have predicted that the major earthquake was coming due to the prevalence of smaller tremors. But smaller tremors don't always lead to a big earthquake, and big earthquakes have happened with no smaller tremors leading up to them. They just aren't a very good predictor at all, which is exactly what these scientists said at the time. People were wondering whether or not they should evacuate based on these tremors. The scientists said the only thing they could, that a big quake was improbable. That's improbable, not impossible. And they stressed that it is impossible for science to predict earthquakes. But prosecutors quoted one of the victims in their closing statement, one Guido Fioravanti, who said, quote, "I remember the fear in her voice. On other occasions, they would have fled that night with my father. They told themselves what the Risk Commission had said, and they stayed." The decision has come under fire from geologists and other scientists from all over the world. And if you still can't see the reason why, understand how this works. Once again, science cannot predict earthquakes. And you absolutely cannot hold someone responsible simply because there was a bad outcome. As long as they followed the science, as long as they've conformed to the scientific community standards, they've done nothing wrong. And yet, they're being held responsible for not telling people to evacuate from an earthquake they had no way of knowing was coming. Italy is going to have problems convincing scientists that they should examine earthquakes for them, and what ones that do will now have the incentive to cry wolf at every little tremor, creating unnecessary panic and the costs of evacuating to avoid earthquakes that never come. Fortunately, the conviction will not stand until an appeal has been considered. Here's hoping the court wises up and does the sensible thing. Unfortunately, courts all over the world lately seem completely reluctant to be at all sensible. Blah 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 stimulus, blah 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 create jobs, blah 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 total and complete failure. It seems there are a lot of stories that have gone that way about Obama's stimulus plan, and now there's one more to add to the pile. A123 Systems, which makes lithium-ion batteries for electric vehicles and electric grids, received $129 million in stimulus money from the federal government. In other words, they got money taken from your pocket and mine. And how many jobs does the federal government itself say were created by this money? The answer is just 408. That's over $310,000 per job. And now the company is going bankrupt. When will we learn? The government says that the jobs A123 reported to recovery.gov aren't all the jobs they created, but there are a couple of problems here. First of all, it's in A123's best interest to report every single job they've created, regardless of whether or not it happened because of the stimulus. Second, even according to the very officials defending the payout, many of these jobs were workers who were installing new factory equipment, jobs that would not remain once the new equipment was in place. Oh, and there's the niggling little fact that they're going bankrupt. I've said it before, I'll say it again, and I'll keep saying it until it sinks in. How can government spending possibly stimulate the economy when it can't even stimulate the companies it gives the money to directly? Several times, this podcast has pointed to the failure of the war on drugs. Now, time for something positive, the success of drug legalization. Last Tuesday, voters in Washington and Oregon voted to legalize marijuana. Voters in Massachusetts and Montana voted to allow marijuana for medicinal purposes. These are wonderful outcomes, and this podcast applauds the voters and activists in those states. But it pales to what Portugal did 10 years ago when they decriminalized not just marijuana, but all drugs. We've all heard the horror stories about what would happen if drugs were legal. Well, Portugal has now given us 10 years worth of data to examine, and despite the propaganda from drug warriors saying that Portugal is now a hotbed of drug addicts roaming the streets, the real results are in, and the number of drug abusers in Portugal has been cut in half. According to Joe Gullo, MD, president of Portugal's Institute of Drugs and Drug Addiction, quote, "There is no doubt that the phenomenon of addiction is in decline in Portugal. This development can not only be attributed to decriminalization, but to a confluence of treatment and risk reduction policies. The vast majority of problematic users are today supported by a system that does not treat them as delinquents, but as sick people." Gee, you mean when you treat drug abusers as patients instead of criminals, you get results? Now who'd have thought? It's also worth mentioning that you don't get these new treatments with prohibition. Not only do those running the programs have to contend with government officials trying to catch drug users, you also have the quite understandable fear on the part of drug users themselves of being caught, and so they never seek out these programs to begin with. Drug legalization means that there can be new innovations on the prevention and treatment of drug abuse, as well as a greater number of abusers actually being helped. In fact, according to the European Monitoring Center for Drugs and Drug Addiction, drug use in Portugal is now below the European average, and much lower than in neighboring Spain. And they said that the before and after study meant that this is absolutely an effect of decriminalization. The trend is continuing, and it seems, fortunately, that the days of drug criminalization are numbered. Perhaps decades from now, school children will read about this period and wonder how we could have allowed the war on drugs to continue when all the evidence shows it doesn't work. Hopefully they'll look back and see that there were those of us when it was going on, asking the very same question. Another piece of good news. One of the bad guys taken down as Christian extremist and fake historian David Barton is revealed for the fraud that he is. He's been exposed for deliberately creating a false version of American history in order to promote Christianity. I know, he's hardly the only one doing this, but listen at how incredible his claims were. In his book, The Jefferson Lies, exposing the myths you've always believed about Thomas Jefferson, he denies most of the secular and skeptical aspects of Jefferson's life. To be fair, a couple of them, such as his fathering children by Sally Hemings, are genuine controversies, with reasonable historians on both sides. But his claims get extreme, perhaps the biggest of which is his denying the existence of the Jefferson Bible. He even engages in a combination straw man and false dichotomy by saying it's a myth that, quote, Jefferson was an atheist and not a Christian. I know of no scholar saying he was either. He was a deist, and this comes out clearly in his writings. In fact, the book is so bad that Thomas Nelson, Barton's Christian book publisher and one of the largest Christian publishers in the world, has pulled the book, after numerous complaints from other Christian scholars. Many pastors in the Cincinnati area announced that they were boycotting Nelson for publishing the book. According to Casey Francis Harrell, Nelson's director of communications, quote, in the course of our review, we learned that there were some historical details included in the book that were not adequately supported. Because of these deficiencies, we decided that it was in the best interest of our readers to stop the publication and distribution. Users on the History News Network called the book, quote, the least credible history book in print. Well, technically it's not anymore, because it's out of print now. The prior examples are just a microcosm of the outright lies Barton has been spreading. His entire body of work seems targeted toward convincing people, and even children, in the form of material for Christian homeschoolers, that the founders created this country not to be a republic, secular with religious beliefs left to everyone's private undertakings, but a Christian theocracy with absolutely no church-state separation. It's nice to know there are people of integrity like the Cincinnati pastors and the people at Thomas Nelson who are ready to stop the Bogosity when they see it, even if it's from someone who promotes the same religion as them. Here's hoping more pastors, publishers, and producers follow suit. Think the World Health Organization is actually worried about your health and not a political agenda? Well then, quite frankly, you haven't been paying attention. But maybe this bit of Bogosity will finally convince you. While smoking cigarettes remains legal in most parts of the world, the WHO is urging countries to ban a product that resembles smoking. Yep, smoking itself is legal, but something that looks like smoking wouldn't be. It's called vaping, and it involves the so-called smoking of so-called electronic cigarettes. I say so-called because there's no tobacco anywhere in the product, and there's no actual smoke or combustion going on. They're called electronic nicotine delivery systems, or ENDS. By every objective measure, they are safer than smoking cigarettes. And hasn't the complaint been all along that the free market supposedly refuses to create a safer cigarette? Then, when they come along and actually do, they want to ban it. Unbelievable. Despite the fact that they're called the World Health Organization, their reasons have absolutely nothing whatsoever to do with any health concerns. They want to ban this safer form of smoking because they, quote, are products resembling cigarettes and could therefore undermine the denormalization of tobacco use. It is essential to change social, environmental, and cultural norms and perceptions regarding the acceptability of the consumption of tobacco products. Parties are therefore invited to consider that a ban of ENDS, as already undertaken by some parties, would contribute to changing the social norms regarding the consumption of tobacco products. Yes, that's right, they're more into thought control and social engineering than they are in people's actual health. Michael Siegel, professor of public health at Boston University, blogs about tobacco policy and provided expert reasons, as if we needed any, why this is completely bogus. Quote, what does the World Health Organization think that smokers who are using electronic cigarettes are going to do if these products are taken off the market? Quit smoking? Not likely. The truth is that if taken off the market, most ex-smokers who have quit by using electronic cigarettes are going to return to cigarette smoking. Oh, that's right, I forgot to mention. Electronic cigarettes are there to help people quit smoking. By slowly reducing the nicotine content over time, addicts can safely wean themselves off of smoking for good. World Health Organization, yeah, right. Siegel continues, quote, thus, a ban on these products will not have any effect on reducing smoking and therefore will not contribute in any way to the denormalization of smoking. Moreover, smokers who are using electronic cigarettes are typically those who are unable to quit. If not for electronic cigarettes, they would be smoking, not ex-smokers. Thus, the use of electronic cigarettes plays no role in normalizing smoking behavior. On the contrary, it helps many smokers get off of cigarettes and thus reduces smoking prevalence. Wait, Siegel, you're saying that when a bunch of political hacks posing as stewards of public health try to push their agenda on others, it has the opposite effect to their stated goals? Wow, who'd have thought? Basically, what the WHO is saying is, it's better for people to keep smoking real cigarettes and suffer all the health consequences that come from it than to do something that looks like smoking a cigarette that might actually cause them to quit. Whiskey Tango Foxtrot? Siegel agrees, quote, by its position on electronic cigarettes, the World Health Organization is sacrificing health for the sake of a narrow ideology. The lives and health of smokers are apparently not very important to WHO because those lives can be sacrificed for the principle that there is nothing worse than a behavior that mimics smoking. Of course, what the WHO fails to realize is that the fact that vaping mimics smoking is precisely the reason why electronic cigarettes are such a promising strategy for smoking cessation. They are the first product in history that addresses both the pharmacologic and the behavioral aspects of smoking addiction. The WHO is also demonstrating that it has lost its vision of its health mission and is now willing to sacrifice the lives of smokers for the sake of an ill-conceived ideology. And the sad thing is, no matter how much of this we see from the WHO and similar organizations, people are still willing to sacrifice their sovereignty to this unelected group of busybody bureaucrats. What's it gonna take, people? I'm really getting tired of these cops behaving badly stories. But as they get more and more egregious, the need for public outrage becomes clearer and clearer. a policeman in New Mexico tasered, get this, a 10-year-old boy. And why? Because the boy didn't want to clean his patrol car. And no, the boy wasn't some troublemaker sentenced to community service or something. It happened when the boys' school held a career day, and police officer Chris Webb was apparently there to show why kids should want to be police officers. For some bizarre and unexplained reason, Webb asked a group of boys if they'd like to clean his patrol car. The boy, identified only as RD, jokingly said he'd rather not do it. The official complaint filed in Santa Fe County Court explains what happened next. Quote, Defendant Webb responded by pointing his taser at RD and saying, "Let me show you what happens to people who do not listen to the police." And what happens? You get shot with a taser. Quote, Both barbs penetrated the boy's shirt, causing the device to deliver 50,000 volts to the boy's body. Defendant Webb pulled the barbs out of the boy's chest, causing scarring where the barbs had entered the boy's skin that looked like cigarette burns on the boy's chest. The boy, who weighed less than 100 pounds, blacked out. Instead of calling emergency medical personnel, Officer Webb pulled out the barbs and took the boy to the school principal's office. Wow. Just wow. According to RD's guardian ad litem, Rachel Higgins, the boy is now suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder. Quote, The boy, RD, has woken up in the middle of the night holding his chest, afraid he is never going to wake up again. No reasonable officer confronting a situation where the need for force is at its lowest, on a playground with elementary-age children, would have deployed the taser in so reckless a manner as to cause physical and psychological injury. So far, Webb has only been punished by being suspended for 3 days. If there were any justice in the universe, he would have been fired instantly. But that just isn't the way government works. Good luck to Higgins in getting some sort of justice and compensation for RD. And now it's time to huff and puff and blow down the straw house of this week's biggest Bogon emitter. And this week, it goes to yet another blowhard economist who doesn't understand the broken window fallacy. Peter Morici is a macroeconomist at the University of Maryland, College Park. And while people in the Northeast were still feeling the effects of Hurricane Sandy, there was Morici to say, "It's all right, this is economic stimulus." Don't believe me? Listen for yourself. Quote, Disasters can give the ailing construction sector a boost and unleash smart reinvestment that actually improves stricken areas and the lives of those that survive intact. Ultimately, Americans, as they always seem to do, will emerge stronger in the wake of disaster and rebuild better, making a brighter future in the face of tragedy. Right, because we're just completely incapable of doing smart things until a hurricane wipes out people's homes and leaves them under several feet of water. Hey, you remember all those cities that improved their infrastructure by evacuating everyone and bombing themselves? Yeah, me neither. Quote, Rebuilding after Sandy, especially in an economy with high unemployment and underused resources in the construction industry, will unleash at least $15 to $20 billion a year in new direct private spending. Oh, it's new spending! And if Sandy hadn't hit, that money would have been doing what? And have you noticed he's talking about jobs like construction? Even assuming this is a net good, what happens when the construction is completed? Where do those jobs go? They go away. Whatever benefit might be gained from this is short-term at best. He continues, quote, Likely more as many folks rebuild larger than before, and the capital stock that emerges will prove more economically useful and productive. This is the essence of the broken window fallacy. In Frederick Bastiat's essay that first described the fallacy, a boy throws a rock through a plate glass window, and producing and installing the new window creates jobs. Bastiat describes this as a fallacy because if the window hadn't been broken to begin with, the shop owner would have bought a new suit. And the lack of that suit means the economy is worse off, not better. So this raises an important question. Why wouldn't the shop owner have replaced the window on his own if it's so much better? You have to consider the opportunity cost, which is the cost of the best alternative foregone, in this case, the suit. The shop owner replaces the broken window because the difference in value between a broken window and a new window is greater than that of the suit. If it weren't, he would have bought the suit anyway and just dealt with the broken window. But what if the window had never been broken to begin with? Then precisely the opposite is the case. The difference in value between the old but intact window and the new window is less than the value of the new suit. If it hadn't been, if the new window really were so much of an improvement, the shop owner would have replaced his window anyway without it having to have been broken in the first place. All this new construction and everything else that happens as a result of Sandy must be weighed against these opportunity costs. What is the best alternative that will now be foregone in order to rebuild? Morici doesn't even try to answer that question. In fact, it seems evident that he doesn't even realize the question exists. He even goes so far as to predict long-term gains. Quote, "When government authorities facilitate rebuilding quickly and effectively, the process of economic renewal in many tangible ways can leave communities better off than before. Factoring in the multiplier effect of $15 to $20 billion spent rebuilding yields an economic benefit from construction of about $27 to $36 billion. Of course, that's just laughably ridiculous. Aside from ignoring the opportunity costs, Morici clings to this long-refuted Keynesian multiplier, which has never even once been empirically verified. The idea of the multiplier is that the money given to the glazier to make the new window and the workers to replace the broken window gets spent in the economy on other things. The workers buy food, the glazier buys a luxury item, or whatever. And the people they buy those things from now have that money so they can spend on other things, and on and on and on. But how is that any more than what would have happened if the money had been given to the tailor for the new suit? The tailor himself would have spent that money on something else, and the people who received that money would have spent it, and on and on and on. Nothing's changed. Macroeconomists like Morici act like this is something new that warps in through a vortex from another dimension or something. He doesn't even think to ask what would have happened if the hurricane hadn't hit, if the houses hadn't been destroyed. And he ends up believing that economic destruction is actually stimulus. Which is why only Peter Morici could possibly be this week's biggest Bogon emitter. And now for a special treat. It's been a while since someone gave an analysis so simple and yet so profound, debunking a popular myth that it qualified for the Silver Cluon Award, the highest and pretty much the only award this podcast gives out. But for only the second time this year, it's happened. And this time, it goes to Julie Borowski, who posts on YouTube as Token Libertarian Girl, for her intellectual takedown, with an attitude and an outlook very much in keeping with the spirit of this podcast, of the Lena Dunham first-time advertisement for Barack Obama. No commentary, I'll just let her video stand on its own.
Your first time shouldn't be with just anybody. You want to do your first political ad for a real misogynist. It should be with a guy who sees women as purely sexual objects. Somebody who really believes women only care about birth control and abortions on demand. You want to do it with a guy who thinks our cute little heads aren't informed about the economy or foreign policy. You want a guy who says, "Oh hey, I ended the war in Iraq," when really he wanted to keep thousands of troops in Iraq past the deadline negotiated before his administration. Or a guy who also panders to the gay community, who only recently endorsed gay marriage a couple months ago because it was politically convenient. It's a fun game to say, "Who are you voting for?" And they say, "Not Obama." And I say, "Why not?" And they go, "NDA, Patriot Act, drone attacks, kill list, high unemployment, national debt." And I shrug because I like to perpetuate stereotypes that women only care about our private parts. My first time in a sexist political ad was amazing. It was this line in the sand. Radical feminists thought it was cute, while self-respecting women thought it was gross and creepy. I sat in front of the camera. I compared women's participation in the political process with sexual intercourse. I set women back a couple of decades.
Nice job, Julie, exposing this cynical and sexist pseudo-feminism for what it is. Enjoy your first time with your shiny new silver Cluon. And now it's time to double facepalm at the stupidity of this week's Extraordinaire! And this week, it's MSNBC's Chris Matthews with his screed against people who don't vote for approved establishment candidates. Warning, the following contains content that no sane person would ever believe.
Anybody who's watching this show, by the way, who hasn't voted and doesn't have direct plans to vote is an idiot.
Really? Just because they behave in a different way than you think they should? And why is that, Chris?
The haters all voted. They always vote. Mm-hmm. The haters will show up. It's the lovers. Oh, I had to check my email, or I would have text something, or, I thought I'd work out, or I'd meet somebody for a drink. Drop it. Vote.
Really? That's why Matthews thinks that people don't vote? It couldn't possibly be because they feel the whole thing is a sham and that nothing they do can possibly make a difference in an openly rigged election system, could it?
And if you vote for one of these numbskull third or fourth party candidates like Gary Johnson or Jill Steele,
yeah, numbskulls who actually want to end the wars, balance the budget, and end the NDAA, the war on drugs, and other intrusions into our civil liberties. What blockheads!
Say, oh, I was so surprised at what happened. No, you shouldn't be.
I don't know any third-party voters who were surprised by the results, Matthews. We know perfectly well how the system is rigged.
Because idiots like you voted for third and fourth party candidates, and they don't know how this system works.
Oh, really? Listen, you smug, condescending ivory tower elitist, I'll bet you anything us third-party activists know a hell of a lot more about how the system works than you do. Do you know what it takes just to get on the ballot in your state? Have you ever stood out in the blistering heat or the pouring rain to get signatures for your party or candidate? Have you ever checked the news regularly to see if the courts will condescend to grant you the privilege of voting for the candidate of your choice? Somehow, I don't think so.
And I'm bothered by people. Oh, I thought I'd vote for John Anderson. That's a Or I really like Ralph Nader and what he stands for. It has nothing to do with the presidency.
Really? A candidate's principles and policies has nothing to do with the presidency? I guess Matthews is just like most voters. He sees elections the way he sees the Super Bowl, where your team has to win and nothing else matters.
Nothing to do with it, but it screwed up so many of our elections.
Aww, well, I'm so sorry that us libertarians and other people of principle and integrity screwed up your pathetic little show of power and narcissism by trying to inject some discussion on real issues here. Sorry, we just thought that choosing the person to run the executive office for another 4 years warranted a little actual discussion of the merits and issues, with challenges to the political status quo and their rhetoric. Sorry, let me just put on this giant foam hand with the index finger extended, and I'll just turn off my brain and root for whoever you tell me to, okay?
The people that think they're better than democracy are really a joke on themselves.
Well, I've still got the foam hand, but it's not the index finger that's extended anymore. Look, the problems we face today in this country, such as numerous foreign entanglements that will kill innocent people and breed more hatred of the U.S., a devastating war on drugs that destroys lives and increases crime and police corruption, a ruined economy with job growth that can't even keep up with the population, getting our junk groped at airports, on and on and on. All of these problems, all of them, are the result not of people voting third party, but of people with exactly Chris Matthews' dogmatic and authoritarian point of view of making sure your horse wins, that the only people we vote for are the ones the establishment, by hook or by crook, has pre-selected for us. It's Chris Matthews and people like him who think they're better than democracy by wanting to remove these vital choices from the population and winnow down the choices to two establishment status quo candidates whom it's hard to even tell the difference between. And the reason third parties can't do any better is exactly because of people like Chris Matthews who permeate the mainstream news media. Of course, most of them are smart enough to hide it and pretend to be objective. Which means that Chris Matthews is not only a smug, elitist, condescending anti-freedom and anti-democracy dogmatist, he's also this week's Idiot Extraordinaire! Well, that wraps up this spoiled brat, tit-for-tat, little brown rat in a campaign hat, vampire bat, welcome mat, where it's at, internet chat, falling goes flat, and silly as a lolcat edition of the Bogosity podcast. Please visit the forums at bogosity.tv. where you can read the show notes and join the discussion on these and other subjects. This podcast is free but not free to produce, so please use the donate button at the top of the Bogosity.tv website or down the right-hand side of the podcast page and give generously to keep this podcast going. And if you'd like to contribute to the podcast, just send a question, statement, news article, or rant to podcast@bogosity.tv. Put it in an audio file, and if it's good enough, it'll get played right in the podcast. Thank you for listening. Until next time, here's a quote from Paul Craig Roberts. As the growing emphasis on feelings crowds out reason, facts will play a smaller role in public discourse. The Bogosity podcast is licensed under Creative Commons Attribution Non-Commercial No Derivatives 3.0 Unported License.
Bogosity.
Do you want answers to creationist claims against evolution? Would you like to know more about evolution yourself, or even engage creationists more directly, with actual peer-reviewed sources to back you up? My book, How Evolution is Scientific, is designed to show the basics of evolutionary theory and how it is so well supported using the scientific method. It's impeccably sourced, with references to the actual scientific material, and is arranged using the creationists' own criteria of what is scientific. Using their own arguments against them, see how evolution is scientific, but creationism is not. Based on observations, accurate predictions, logic, and evidence. Get answers to common creationist claims, and even a primer on abiogenesis, the start of all life. It's all in my book, How Evolution is Scientific, available at Amazon and on Kindle, EPUB, and PDF as well. Get How Evolution is Scientific and never be taken in by creationists again.